Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first chapter of our Flutter course. Um, there are so many different topics that I could choose for the first chapter. They're all very important. Um, However, after going through the material that I've been preparing for you for this course, I realized that one of the absolute basic points that we have to go through is the developer accounts. For Apple and Google. Now, if you're not familiar with the term of developer account, there are basically what a developer account allows you to do is to release your applications on Apple's App Store and Google's Play Store. Mm, As I mentioned in the introduction, you may choose to follow along this course without actually releasing the application to the App Store and the Play Store. But even if you do decide to not release the applications on the aforementioned stores, you will still, for the optimal experience of development for iOS and Android, you will most definitely need a developer account. And the reason behind that is, it is quite deep to try to explain the actual reason behind it. But from my perspective, one of the most important reasons you may want to have a developer account is to create the so-called app IDs. So every application on iOS and every application on Android has an identifier, which is usually something called a reverse domain identifier. And it's kind of like, I still find it strange the way it is, but somehow it was decided that every application needs to have an identifier, and every identifier is kind of like associated with a domain name, and a domain name is kind of like a website. For instance, if you have yourname.com as your website, then you would say that, okay, I'm going to create an application for iOS and Android in Flutter, and I'm going to call it foobar. Then it was somehow decided that your application's identifier would then in that case be, if you reverse it, then it would literally be your domain in reverse, which would be com.yourname.your application's name. I don't really know. If somebody knows the reasoning behind it, I would be glad to hear that. And I'm sure that there's resources out there explaining why that is the case, but it kind of feels like it's become the norm, and we just have to roll with it. So the reason I explained the app identifier is that when you set up your backend later, when we set up the backend later together, in that the client that we write in Flutter is going to talk with our backend and store the notes, retrieve the notes, create a user, sign in with a user, etc., etc. That backend setup also will require you to have your app identifier. And even though you don't necessarily need to have a developer account to get an app identifier, because an app identifier is just something that you decide, okay, here's my app identifier. I think my website is called this, blah, blah. And even though you don't actually need a website, that's the thing, but an app identifier is usually associated with a website. So don't worry about it. You don't have to have a website in order to follow along with these steps that I'm going to name here. But it is still good practice to create your developer account in order to officially register your app identifiers. And another reason that you will need a developer account for Apple and Google is that you will, for Apple, if you want to be able to deploy your application onto a telephone and not use a simulator, then you will need to register a developer account and use some resources that Apple provides you in forms of certificates and keys and profiles in order to deploy your application to a telephone or an iPad, for instance. In Android, the world is a little bit different in that you don't have to do the same process, but in order to then submit your application to Google for review later so that it can be available for everybody who has an Android telephone or a tablet, you will still need a developer account. So it goes without saying that it is a very important step, that even if you decide not to deploy your application later to App Store and Play Store, it's still a very fundamental step. So I suggest that you actually go through these steps that I'm going to provide you in the first chapter. And that's why I actually decided to have this as chapter 1. Sorry, I have to just edit my notes a little bit. If you haven't watched the introduction to this course and you're just jumping here, I suggest that you go to the introduction and watch it. I know it was about 34 minutes. It was quite a long introduction, but there were so many important points that I feel everybody needs to know before you get started with the course. So please watch those. If you see me moving my head around, then you know the reason. And I explain a lot of things that are like the fundamentals of this course and the reasoning behind all those decisions, which I believe are so important that I still suggest everybody watch the introduction before they actually start with the course. So we've now talked about the basics. And if you go to why we need a developer account, I believe I've already covered this, in that a developer account is the utility is an account that you register for Apple and Google that gives you extra resources as a developer in order to be able to deploy your application, test and deploy your applications to the respective app stores. Now, if we talk about developer accounts, there are two main types of developer accounts. One is an individual account, and the other one is a company account. And for me, the biggest difference between these two different accounts is the liability. And by liability, I mean if you register an individual account, then you as an individual are liable for that application. And as users download your application and interact with it, if they have any problems, and if, for instance, there's any judiciary problems, like if someone for some reason believes that you're storing their data in the wrong way, or that you're storing their personal information without exposing that and telling the users about that, then they can personally hold you liable for instance, breach of information or GDPR infringements or whatever it is. So just know that you can register yourself as an individual for both Apple's App Store and Google's Play Store. But you need to also be aware that should you wish to do that, then you're personally liable for any problems that may be occurring in the future. So that's the personal account or an individual account. And as a company account, then you kind of like based on what type of company you've created, you may or may not be personally liable for any damages that may be caused to your users and if they bring it up to you. Now, I know this is all sounding a lot serious. In reality, what we are trying to do is not that big a deal, but we are still trying to store. I mean, the goal of this course is to go through an application and create an application that can store users' notes. Notes can be quite personal, and you're storing those notes then on a back end that you have full access to. So you're kind of like storing user created data. So it is very important that you actually treat that data correctly, make sure that nobody except those who are authorized can access that data. So from a responsibility point of view, it is actually a little bit different what kind of company account you want to create, if that's what you want to create now. Because, for instance, in Sweden, where I live, you can have a personal company account in that, sorry, a personal company. So you can register a personal company. It means that you are personally liable for that company. And you can also create a company that it has like it's like an umbrella. Basically, it sits on top, and then there are people who are directors of the company and blah blah. So you're not personally liable, uh, and that is the same structure that you can find in many other countries. I believe U.S., Germany, Sweden, England, and many other countries. You can set up companies that are either sole proprietorship or something called, English is not my first language, but it's something like that. Or you can create like a limited company that you have limited liability and you're not personally liable. So these are the different types of developer accounts that you can set up. So we can, I mean, that point, I think we all understand now that you can create an individual or a company account. Now, I think I mean, I personally registered already an account uh, as an iOS developer and an Android app developer. So, and since I registered a company account, I can't go through setting up the exact same company again. But at least I can show you some of the steps involved in creating those accounts. So, what we could do is to, now you can't see the screen right now, but I will bring it up here so that you can also see. Now I'm going to bring my studio here, and I'm going to make this screen a little bit bigger so that you can see my screen better. So let me also make this a little bit smaller on top so that you can see the content a little bit better. So you can see here that there are two options available to you. Either you enroll as an individual or you enroll as an organization. And it is strongly recommended, actually. So you need to make sure that you have two-factor authentication turned on. And so that's not a problem. All this means basically, as an individual, it means that just you will need an account. You will need to set up an account. However, if you want to set up as an organization, like if you have a limited company and you want to create an Apple developer account that is linked to that organization, is a little bit different because you will need to set up something called a DUNS, or I don't know how you want to pronounce it, DUNS, which is kind of like is a new thing for me at least, but it is an identifier for your company that you either have been assigned to already by, I think there is a company called DMB. So if we go to, let me see if I can bring the notes for that. Let's see. Learn more. If you go to learn more here, DMB is called by Dunn and Bradstreet. So there, then we have the ability to register a DUNS number. And for me, I was one of the lucky people to have already been assigned a DUNS number for my company by DMB, because you either have, let's see if they write it here. You see, it says DMB may have already assigned your organization a free DUNS number. Before enrolling, look up your organization to see if you have a DUNS number. So you can just click on that link and we can go here and you can then select your region. For me, it would be Sweden. Then I would write my company name, some address information, contact information, etc., etc. And then you can check whether there is a DUNS number assigned to your company. So I suggest that you actually do this by going to this website. Okay. So that's for a DUNS number if you already have one. But if you don't have one, then you will have to create and request a DUNS number from DNB. I would show you the website for DMB and DUNS number right now, but my browser is set up so that my locale is already provided to the browser, which is Swedish. And then if I go to the DMB website, you're going to see everything in Swedish. And that doesn't make any sense just to read the information in Swedish. But I believe you can go to DMB's website. So if I search for a DMB, Duns or Duns or here. So this is a Swedish localized website for DMB. Let's see if we can change the language. Actually, I can see here that they're actually in Sweden. And I wonder if we can here change country. Let's just say international. So if we go here, let's see if we can, if there's any way to actually request a DUNS number. Like if you say DUNS, and I can't see anything related to that, to be honest with you. So if we go back here, I can see I can request the DUNS, and here the locale is SVSE, and here the locale was ENGB. So what happens if we just go back to this URL that we were on before, and then I just change the locale? Does that work? Well, unfortunately, but I mean, here, DUNS number. Get a DUNS number. Okay, that's good. And then you can here say, I'm an Apple developer. Press continue. Oh, it sends you back here. That was really bad. So it says, look up your organization in Apple's website. And when you try to get a DUNS number, it tells you to go to Apple's website. If we say that, then okay, legal business name, etc., etc. Okay, so you will need to go through this process, which doesn't seem to be completely easy, to get a DUNS number. You see, request the DUNS number. So you probably just want to go to dmb.com/DUNS-number.html. And I can't explain this complete process, to be honest with you, because first of all, it will be a waste of time for both of us, because these are so many moving parts and a third-party company that I have no control over. So if I even try to explain their process, it may change tomorrow. So it's not a good investment of our time. But everybody else has figured it out, and I'm pretty sure that if you just go and say request a DUNS number, you can just follow the process and then get your DUNS number. But begin by going through, look up your organization. So you may already have been assigned a free DUNS number. So do that first, please. But if you have to request a DUNS number, I believe there is a little bit of a cost to it. And that is about $70, if I'm $70 to $80 at the time of recording this video. So count with almost about $100. Hopefully not more. Hopefully actually a lot less, but around $70 at least. Does that make sense? I said so many numbers. $70 at least. So try to get your DUNS number. At least that's what Apple says you will need. And of course, if you want to register as a company, I can't stress this enough, you will need a website. I remember vividly when I registered a developer account at Apple, and they rejected my request saying that, well, your website doesn't have any content. And they were right, because I just created an empty website, like a domain. I didn't actually create an empty website. I registered a domain, and there was no website. So when you typed my website's name, it would just not show you anything. So and they came back and said, no, your application is rejected because you don't have a website. What kind of company are you? So then I had to actually get like a hosting service, and I have some content in there, have like a support. So if you are registering as a website, sorry, as a company and as an organization, you will need a hosting service. You will need a domain provider. Uh, you will need to ensure that you have a website, because they're not the same thing. If you have a host and you have a domain provider, it still doesn't mean that you have content on your web page. But what I've realized is that if you register your domain and have hosting service, make sure that you have a website, just have some content in there, say hello, we are this business, that business, um, we work with this and this. If you have any questions, contact this email, and here's our phone number, here's their address, etc. So you need to ensure that if you have an organization, it is actually an organization. It's not just like, hi, my name is Food Bar, I'm sitting at home, contact me if you have any questions. Not like that. So, and of course, after you made your decision, you start the enrollment process. So now, learn more, continue enrollment on the web you can do, and then you come here and you will basically need to provide your information and continue with the process. Now, we're not going to go through this, but the important thing I have to mention here is that as you go through the enrollment process an Apple developer, unfortunately, there is a cost. Last time, which is about a few months ago when I registered, or I had to renew my registration. You have to renew your registration for um, Apple's developer account. You have to renew it every year. And as I've mentioned here, the process is not free, unfortunately. It costs, or last time I registered or renewed my registration, it cost $99. And I believe it's been $99 for a very long time. So if you're in Sweden, it costs about 1,000 crowns. If you're in England, it probably costs about 80 pounds or something. And in the US, it's about, yeah, just count with almost $100. So I used to be able to provide this, like you have to have some sort of a credit card or a debit card to be able to pay for it. So um, after you've done that, after you register your account as an organization, you will have direct access then, or an immediate access to your developer account. And you can start developing applications, et cetera, et cetera. So if you're following along with this course and you want to deploy your application to the App Store and Play Store, please do this first. Get your developer account either as an organization or as an individual. Get that process out of the way, because a developer account, especially if you're an organization, as I mentioned here, is not a super fast process. I mean, when you get the account, then it's simple, it's fast, and you're in there immediately. But the process itself is a long process. So I remember for me, it took about 2 weeks because I got one rejection. It took about 1 week for them to renew, like to review the process, the documents again. So is not a fast process. Unfortunately, it's like very, it's, yeah, it's just a long, boring process. So get that out of the way if you can, please. Um, so that's for the long and not free part for iOS. And also, one more thing that I need to mention is that if you're registering and you want to sell applications, which is not the purpose of this course, but if you want to sell applications, then you will have to provide some banking and tax information. So they need to ensure that the stuff that you're selling in different countries, the money that is then being sent to your bank account, will be accounted for when you're paying your taxes. So, and I believe that if you're trying to sell apps on the App Store, then you will have to fill in some forms with the US tax offices. I don't even remember, IRS, I think, Internal Revenue Services, or something like that. IRS, I believe that you have to fill some forms, like send the forms to them. Then they will come back with some sort of identifier to you. And then you will need to use that identifier on Apple's website in order to basically say that, yeah, I know I'm selling stuff in the US, I'm selling stuff in Japan, I'm selling stuff in Sweden, Norway, but I'm gonna pay taxes for them here in my country. And that's what that form says. Here's my name, here's my company. I'm an organization or I'm an individual, so I have no company. My personal identification number in my country is this. Is my address, my phone number, etc. And then you send it to them, to IRS, and then they come back and say, okay, now we know who you are, and here is your identifier number, like a business identifier number, BIN or something they call it. I think I don't remember exactly, but I believe depending on whether you're a business or an individual, then the number is a little bit different. So if you're a business, I think it's BIN, and if you're an individual, is IN. I don't know. So I don't know what that dialogue was. Some Bluetooth devices wants to connect to my computer. I don't know what it is. So that's that part. It can be long and it's not free. Okay. That was a lot of information. That's for iOS. Now, what we can do now is to talk a little bit about Android as well. And the good thing about the Android process, like setting up your account for as a Google developer, is that it's a lot more straightforward, as you would expect from Google, and given that they're even like sending updates to an Android app to the Google developer console is a lot more straightforward than it is for iOS. I don't want to scare you, but it is a fact. And you will know that later when we actually get to the end of this course where we release the apps for iOS and Android, that it is a little bit more straightforward for Google Play Store. But you still need to sign up for a developer account. So I'm going to take in my notes that I've talked about that. So what we also need to know is that there is a URL that we can go to. I'm going to copy that and paste it over here so you see which one I'm talking about. So here. Then you can see that you can set up a developer account. And once you've logged in, so I'm assuming that you're logged in, then you go to play.google.com/console/user or u0 sign up is where URL. It may change. So let's just, what you can do is just to Google Play Console developer account or Google developer account. Then you will end up in a URL that looks kind of like this. So don't count with this URL that I mentioned here because it may change. That's what I'm saying. And you can, as it is for iOS development, you can either set it up personally as an individual or you can set up as an organization. Now, I happen to have set it up for myself as an organization because I do have a company here in Sweden. So it is a lot easier for me to tie all my business relations with Apple and Google into one entity, which is my developer account for, which is my company. So it wouldn't make so much sense for me to explain this either, to go through all the details. But if you want to set it up for yourself as an individual, just press on get started. Or if you want to set it up as an organization, just press get started there. As you can see, you can provide information about your organization. And you can see here as well, as soon as you say I'm an organization, then they say, okay, what's the website? So you can see if you say, I don't have a website, we recommend adding a website that represents your organization. Well, kind of makes sense. I mean, if you're a company, where's your website? Every company should have a website, unless you're like a pizza restaurant or something. Even a pizza restaurant probably needs a website. But we have a pizza restaurant here in our town that doesn't have a website. So they're on Facebook. And you probably don't want to say that your company's website is on Facebook. So yeah, where were we here? And if you say you're an individual, then you come here and they ask for some other stuff, but still interesting because it says enter the URL of your website or social media profile. So here you kind of need to enter that as well. So maybe you can get away with a Facebook URL. I laughed about it, but maybe you can get away with it. I don't know. But I don't recommend that, to be honest with you, because as you will see later in the course, when we actually submit our apps to App Store and Play Store, there are a few key data points that you have to provide to both stores. One is a privacy policy URL, and the other one is a support URL. And there are also two other emails you have to provide. So yeah, four. The emails, the first one is the support email, and the other one is a contact email. And if you're setting up a business account, then I really suggest that you actually set up a website, because if you set up a website and you have a domain, you have an email provider, then your email will kind of be like foobar at mybusiness.com. It's a lot more professional to set up an email that is connected to your email, to your domain, than it is to say Mr. Johnson at gmail.com. I wouldn't trust a business that has a gmail.com account. I kind of want to know that, yeah, here's a serious business, that they have their own website and blah, blah, blah. But on the contrary, setting up a website, setting up some emails doesn't necessarily mean you're serious either. So, but it makes it more dedicated, if you know what I mean. So yeah, that's the process for setting up an account also for as an Android developer. I think that's about it. That's all I wanted to mention in this first chapter of our course. I highly recommend that you get your developer accounts for Apple and for Google. What you'll also need to know is that, I mean, I've talked a lot about now Apple account and a Google developer account, but if you're developing your application on a Windows machine, for instance, if you're trying to learn how to develop Flutter applications and you don't care about releasing your application at all, you don't have to do any of this. Just follow along with the course as usual, no problem. But if you want to actually release your application for iOS, then you most definitely need to also have a Mac, because you can't build your application otherwise. There are some tricks you can do. You can like build your Flutter application and later on like a friend's Macintosh if they have one, or you can send it to a service that's in the cloud and they build the app for you, and then they will send it back to you, and then you can submit it. So, or maybe they even have to submit it. It's a bit hairy, to be honest with you, but it's a complicated topic. It is a little bit difficult to explain. For instance, if you're on a Windows machine, you can't even have Xcode. Xcode is the tool, and the entire like a chain of tool sets that gets installed on a Macintosh in order to build an application for iOS platform. Now, why am I talking about this? The reasoning behind that is that if you're developing a Flutter application, then Flutter can be deployed on a Windows machine, Macintosh, or collectively called as desktop, web, Android, iOS, 5 platforms at the moment. And if you're trying to release your application and build it for iOS, for instance, and test on an iPhone or an iPad, you can't do that on a Windows machine, unfortunately. There's nothing wrong with a Windows machine. It's just Apple's fault for locking down their build systems and all their tools to Macintosh. So they haven't made the conscious decision, or they haven't made the decision to bring their tool system and tooling to Windows, unfortunately, or Linux. Swift, which is the language to write native applications for iOS, can be run, I believe, on Linux. On Windows, might be, but its main platform is still Mac. I know that this is a lot of information also to learn, but if there is anything I want to close this chapter, the first chapter of this course with, is you can learn Flutter and follow along with the steps I'm going to provide in this course without having to register any accounts yet. So that's point one. Point two is that You will need a Macintosh if you want to comfortably build and release your Flutter app for iOS. If you want to release your application on Google Play Store, which is point 3, if you want to do that, you will need to register a developer account on Google Play Console, as I've shown you here. And I believe that's all. That's all you need to know. So some of you may already have all these accounts and don't have to worry about it, but some may not know all this. Like if you're coming from a design background, if all you do is work with Figma and etc., this is some of the important information that you'll need to know about, because I don't want you to get like frustrated during the process. So I just want you to have some information so that you can get started at least without too much hassle. All right, that's it, I think, for this chapter. I can take in my notes that I've explained everything I wanted to explain. Did take about 35 minutes. It's not unexpected, to be honest. It's a lot of information, and I kind of want to take my time with it. It's important that you, and for me as well, to understand all this. So great. I think that's it for this video. So I'll see you in the next chapter.